Okay, so shall I start?
Yeah, you can start.
Okay, so thanks, Valentina, for the introduction, and thanks also for the invitation to present my work at this one-year series. This is a joint work with Dani Bahar from Brown University and Rashid Duri from Harvard Business School and Sarah Signorelli from the University of Amsterdam, and in where we looked at the international mobility / migration of inventors and how this is important for the diffusion of technologies and across borders. So it is about inventor migration, as Valentina was which is something that I've been working on in the last for many years already. So I'm starting with I'm going to start with a little motivation, but clearly this part of this isn't necessary because of you already have a lot of knowledge about the importance of the phenomenon of the migration and how the attention it has received from scholars. You may also be aware of that in the recent decades, and sorry because the data I'm showing here is from a paper by Bill Kerr and co-author in Journal of Economic Perspectives that and the data come from census, and the last data point is 2010, but I'm sure that this could be updated to more recent years. But essentially what they show is that despite migration, let's say, being relatively small share of population, the migrants, international migrants worldwide, when you look at the heterogeneity of the phenomenon, when you look at high-skill migration versus low-skill migration, or who are the origins and who are the destinations, you see a lot of heterogeneity. You see that over the years, the high-skill migration has increased way more than the low-skill migration, that this migration is especially high-skill, has been concentrated in a handful of countries, particularly Anglo-Saxon countries, and particularly the United States, and among them there has been an explosion of migration of scientists and engineers and in general STEM workers. Among these STEM workers, my work has been focused on inventors. Inventors are very interesting because, first of all, because they introduce like technologies or ideas that has a lot of potential in terms of economic growth and in terms of well-being of societies. So it's important to understand what is going on with these inventors. Of course, they are let's say a representative sample of the most talented individuals in a society, but at the same time a specific class of them, right? Because they are like the la creme de la creme. But they are also interesting because you can have a lot of information from bibliometric sources, and particularly from patent data. These are the two inventors that they are Özlem Türeci and Uğur Şahin that are behind the one of the COVID-19 vaccines. They are not migrants, but they are children of migrants, and they appear in the front page of a large number of patents at the USPTO office or the PCT office, and I will come back to that. And with not only their names, but also where they live, with whom they created that patent or that idea, who is the owner and therefore likely the employer of these inventors. As well as other information such as the technological field to which it contributes, from where the scientific work, from where the ideas come from, and so on. That's why the inventor migration. So inventor data is interesting, and particularly inventor migration is also very interesting. So this is the share of for the years 2002-2011, the share of and non-nationals or foreign national inventors in each of these countries. As you can see, there are countries like Switzerland and Luxembourg that have almost half of the population of inventors with foreign nationality, while other countries highly innovative countries like Japan or Korea are at the bottom of the ranking. These data come from a data set we created several years ago, in where for a number of years, for around 20 years, we were able to extract both the residence of the inventors as well as the nationality, and therefore this allowed us to create a lot of indicators like this and do research around them. This data is only a subsample of all patents, and therefore a subsample of all inventors, because they are only PCT patents. PCT patents are actually, let's say, the international patents. Okay, so when you patent when you want to protect your ideas, you patent in national offices, and the protection it gives you, it is restricted to the national borders of that office. If you think that your idea is going to be important, and therefore you aim to sell it in several markets, you would go through an internationalization of your intellectual property protection. And one of these ways to do that is through this international office, which is the PCT process. We can also do the same over time for a sample of countries. The first graph show again the PCT patents, and the other two EPO patents, so patents from European Patent Office, as well as the United States office. For the second and third graph, we do not have the nationality of the inventors. Again, we only have that for the PCT ones. But in here, what we did is to play with we look at the name of the inventors and check whether the name or surname were likely to be local or likely to be migrant. I come back to that later on. So essentially, given this evidence in recent years, in recent almost decades, has been a lot of interest to understand the relationship between migration and innovation, and what are the mechanisms that may create this link, this influence of migration, or particular skill migration, to innovation. And there has been a lot of works, some claiming that simply skill immigration in particular just increases the supply of a skilled labor force in a country, and therefore the likelihood of having patents. There has been some literature showing that just mobility across borders increases the quality of the match employer-employee, and particularly the quality of the match location-employee. That is to say, when talented people lives in countries and places that gives them resources to do science and connections with smart colleagues and so on and so forth, they become more productive and therefore more able to produce ideas. And there is also a literature showing that there might be a positive, at least, correlation between the diversity of societies and the diversity of the teams and the capacity to produce ideas. So this is another mechanism. Of course, one of the mechanism between behind the relationship between migration and innovation is the diffusion of the ideas across countries and across borders in general. They may lead to innovation. So when these people move from country to country, they may bring ideas with them that are prone to create other ideas recombined with the host country ideas, or simply their own ideas brought from abroad. And this is actually the economic historians. This is something that actually the economic historians have studied quite often, because especially these episodes of kind of mass skill migrations that have occurred in the past, usually because maybe they were expelled from some political, ideological, religious reasons from their country of origin, and they were arrived elsewhere. And this is a way, to look at how a shock of these characteristics might be behind the diffusion of ideas. So I'm not gonna go through all the examples. I will stop only in the case of Samuel Slater, who was a Derbyshire textile craftsman that in 1789 migrated to the United States. It where the UK had the technology to process the cotton, but not the cotton itself, while the United States was in the opposite position. They have the raw materials, but not the technology. So in that moment, the UK authorities banned the textile craftsmen to travel to the United States. But he couldn't resist the temptation from American entrepreneurs, and he moved to America, and he actually became the father of the American Industrial Revolution, while, of course, in the UK is known, as possibly you know better than I do, as Slater the Traitor. Coming to more recent times, so this is Ismael Mena, who is so he appears in our data set as the first inventor in Chile in the technology subclass A61B, which essentially is like medical instruments. He's the first one, but 17 more patents came after him in that same technology in Chile, made by 19 inventors. So what we ask ourselves in this paper is how come that he learned about this technology if he was the first to patent in that technology, in that concept, right? So actually, this is the patent that he produced in 1996 in Chile while he was in Santiago de Chile. But then tracking him through other patent documents, we find out that in 1994, so 2 years before, Ismael Mena was in Los Angeles. And he was producing that same technology with other colleagues in Los Angeles. So he was a global mobile inventor. So in this paper, what we do is we explore this idea of global mobile inventors, and we try to answer questions such as that how common these GMIs are in the data, and whether they differ or not from other inventors, whether GMIs can explain the emergence of new technology subclasses in a countries they go to, similar to what Samuel Slater did in the United States, that became the father of the American Industrial Revolution, but by technologies. And we try to identify or to see how they do it, how they diffuse these technologies when they arrive at the host country. In this paper, at least so far, there is no a fancy identification strategy, and what we aim here is to describe this phenomenon the best possible. These are the main findings, but I'll come back to this at the end. So concerning the literature to which we speak, there are basically two strands of literature. One is in general the globalization of innovation. There has been a lot of literature showing that the production of ideas is becoming a global phenomenon, and part of it is driven by immigration flows. And in particular, we speak to the literature that have tried to, as I said at the beginning, to establish a link between the mobility of human capital, and particularly high-skilled human capital, and the diffusion of ideas across borders. There is all these historical accounts that I showed at the beginning, but also there has been a lot of more recent literature, particularly showing how skilled diasporas may send knowledge back to their home countries, right? So you have to imagine the idea of the Indian or Chinese engineers in Silicon Valley learning about either studying there or going there and learning and interacting with peers, and eventually either sending back this knowledge to colleagues at home or returning themselves to create businesses there, and so on and so forth. So the aim of this literature has been to generalize this anecdotal evidence. Most of this literature have used patent citations to proxy for the knowledge diffusion, but unfortunately, patent citations has been increasingly criticized because less and less they reflect knowledge flows. So researchers have tried to come up with alternative ideas, and actually one of the contributions of our paper is precisely that. So our data comes from patents view, which essentially is this data visualization tool put forward by the chief economists of the USPTO, the US Patent and Trademark Office. And it contains all granted patents at the USPTO starting from 1976. And the added value of patents view is that it uses like complex algorithms to disambiguate inventors. Disambiguated inventors means that, and let me go back to the front page of the patent. So here you have the names of the inventors as well as other information. What you don't have is an ID number or a passport or something like that. So if an inventor like Ismail Mena patents or appears in several patents, you should be able to identify him, particularly when he changes country, when he changes address, and all these things. And this is the particular case of Ismail Mena. The way that researchers have done that is using the information contained in the patent itself, like the technological field to which it contributes, the co-authors, the knowledge that is cited in these patents, and so on, to establish whether two inventors with the same or similar name belong to the same person or not. Ismail Mena might be a rare name, at least for the USPTO, but think about John Smith. John Smith is difficult to disambiguate because there might be many John Smiths, and it's difficult to know who is who. So with this data set, what we do is we track all the inventors that change their addresses and change their addresses across borders, and we label them global mobile inventors.
Sorry, Ernest, can I ask you a question? So global mobile inventors is not like a link to the concept of nationality or country of origin. It's just like two people that like the same person that like moves of country.
At this stage, no, and I'll come back to this later on. But at this stage, no. That's why at the beginning I said kind of mobility/migration, right? Because they are movers in terms of geographical movers. But from the data, we do not know yet whether the direction of the move, whether they are immigrating or returning. And we will try to do something about that, but I'll show you later on. We don't know whether, or we can kind of presume, but it's not clear whether they move on a permanent basis, on a temporal basis, or whether they move because they are asked to move by the multinational who employs them, and therefore they are there for a couple of years and they come back. I mean, we have some of that. We at this stage we group them all together, and we try to later on to look at some heterogeneity.
Thank you.
Sorry, can I ask a question?
Sure.
So just to be clear, so the patent view captures US patents only or international? So does it capture everything, basically national, international, and US, or only the US?
Only the US.
Only the US.
So one work we are trying to do now is to replicate the exact thing using the EPO, right? But disambiguating across different patent offices is really cumbersome because the information is not homogeneous across offices. The quality of the patents is definitely not homogeneous across offices. At this stage, we conform ourselves to say, okay, the USPTO is not the biggest now, because the biggest office is the Chinese one, is the second biggest. But let's say that is the most attractive market for innovations, and therefore whoever in the world who wants or who believes that the innovation is important should try and go to the USPTO. And therefore, we claim that it's kind of representative of all the world. If you don't believe us, we will try to. This is something that I don't show here because it's not done. But what we are working on now is to replicate the same thing with the EPO. I do not think that aside maybe from the PCP, that other offices are as representative of all countries as the EPO or the USPTO. Despite that, both of them may have biases, right? Because of course, US applicants are more prone to apply there than other countries, and for Europe it happens the same, particularly German applicants. So this is what we have. We have granted patents belonging to around 15 million inventors. We group them technologically into around 600 different technologies. Each of the patent comes with a list of technologies. At the USPTO, there is one code which is the main technology, and other codes that are subsequent or secondary technologies. At this stage, we use only the main technology, although we do robustness checks with all the technologies. For descriptive analysis, we also look at measures of quality of the patents, but this comes later on. So this is the number of patents that we have in our data set over time. Clearly, that has been increasing over the years. This is the contribution of the different countries. The US, of course, is the main one. Second is Japan. Third is South Korea, and China is the green one, has been catching up. These are only patents at the USPTO. This is a bit of the distribution of patents across the world. So what do we do? Again, we define as a GMI as an inventor who patents in more than one country throughout his or her career. So the GMI is someone that has moved across borders. As I said at the beginning, as I said before, GMI might be a migrant, but not, or what we understand as a migrant, or maybe what you understand as a migrant, and maybe I'm ignorant in some of the concepts, but we don't necessarily know whether it's a long-term migrant, a short-term migrant, or again, a returnee or an immigrant. Although this is something that we try to look at.
Sorry, I have another question. So, like, you have the information of like the address of the person, and you can like track it.
I just have the only thing I have is the name and the address of the person. So, if I found him or her in the year 2000 in Barcelona, and then in the year 2002 in Paris, I assume that at some point between the two, he moved or she moved to Paris, to France. Maybe on a permanent basis, maybe not. If eventually, after some time, I see him or her again patenting in Spain, clearly I can say that he came back to Spain. The point is for how long, because the inventors can move to another country and stay there and keep patenting for many years, but without moving anymore. So the definition of GMI might change depending on what research question we want to answer, right? So someone might be GMI because him or her in more than one country in our data set, and he will be forever GMI, or you can keep the condition of GMI maybe for some time, because after some time you are part of the local economy and you are not anymore a GMI. So we have several definitions. The main one is that you are GMI since the date we see you in the new country for the next 365 days, for 1 year. Okay, so you may keep patenting there, despite your previous patents are already there, but you keep the label of GMI for 1 year. And we play around with alternative definitions, like keeping the label of GMI for forever, or only when you arrive. The first patent you do when you arrive gives you the label of GMI, then you become a local. We do not only look at GMIs, but we also look at GMIs with previous experience in that same technology. So what we as a GMI, we can have someone like Ismael Mena that patented first in the United States in the technology A61B, and then in Chile in the technology A61B. But Ismael Mena could have patented in the United States in the technology A61B, and then in Chile in the technology B12O, which is a different one. It's by biotech. So we do this the differentiation of GMI with previous experience or a GMI without previous experience. It doesn't mean that he or she doesn't have any previous experience. She doesn't have experience in that same technology, but will have experience in other technology. Okay, so this is the focus of our analysis is the GMI with previous experience. Why? Because we want to describe the phenomenon of someone bringing in the technology to a new country. So we need to understand whether he or she knew about that technology before coming to the new country. Yeah, this is kind of, okay, this is like a graph on how to define the different, or how to depict the different definitions of the GMI in temporal terms. This is for the time window 1519, which actually is not in our final data set, but it shows the main corridors. Of course, the United States is in the ranking of like in most of the main corridors, like as an in, as an out country, with other big countries also big countries in terms of innovation and big countries in terms of high-skill migration, like China or India, Korea, also ranking high. This is the number of movements we have every year, splitted by those that we kind of proxy that are across firms and those that are within firms. This is some of the same assignee. Assignee for us is the firm from which they work, for which they work. This is an underestimation possibly of the within firm mobility, because firms may change names, because yeah, for many things that we do not observe, this is possibly an underestimation, but we try also to take this into account. Let me go back to the issue of the corridors. These are the top 10 corridors over the years and the direction of these corridors. So as you can see, from the 80s to 2010-15, first of all, the United States, that has been always there. Second of all, Asian countries has been increasing their importance over time, particularly Korea, India, and particularly China. And another interesting thing is that if you look at the last column, the last top ranking of corridors, you see that the biggest one is the Mobile Inventors from the US to the China, and the second biggest one is from China to the United States. Of course, what we see in this, and we can tell you that possibly the biggest one for the US to China corridor is not made of American inventors migrating to China, but Chinese inventors possibly trained in the United States that eventually moved back to China. So we play around with the names of these people to understand whether they are returnees or immigrants. This is kind of easy with Chinese or Indian names. Of course, it's going to be more tricky when the corridor is UK, Germany, and definitely impossible when the corridor is US, Canada, or US, UK. For that, we use the IBM Global Name Recognition, which is something that we've been using in many of our papers, which is essentially a sort of big dictionary of names and surnames associated to a nationality that was collected by the US immigration authorities in the 90s. So, and combinations of that. So essentially we throw the name and surname of the inventor to the GNR, and it returns a sort of a list of countries that are associated to that name or associated to that surname with a frequency, whether this name or that surname are very frequent in that particular country. Yeah, so this is what the GNR does. So what do we do with this information? Essentially, let me show you some examples. For instance, we have this inventor that first patent in China, then also in China and the United States, and we conclude that he has a very Chinese name, and therefore, and particularly the name is not Anglo-Saxon. Therefore, we label him or him as an immigrant. On the contrary, the other case, Marco Paniello, that moved from the UK to Italy, he moved to Italy with a very Italian name and a non-Anglo-Saxon name, and therefore we label him as a returnee. When the countries share language, like the US and Canada, it's impossible for us to say anything about that. So we assume that the nationality of the inventor is that of the first country where he or she patented. In this case, we would say that Richard is a US national, and when he moved to Canada, he was an immigrant in Canada. When the countries do not speak the same language, like Germany and Canada or the United States, but either Peter or either the name or the surname are common in both places, we do exactly the same. We assign the nationality of the country where we saw him or her for the first time, in this case Germany, and he will be immigrant everywhere else he goes, and returnee whenever he comes back to Germany. So if we do this and we split the corridors, we see things a bit more clear. For instance, if you look at the last column, we see now that these are the GMI, the immigrant flows, and you can see that clearly the corridors are more sense, going from China to Korea to United States, and not the other way around. Of course, the US Canada US are still problematic. Same for returnees. Now the returnees are from the US to China, Korea, India, or Japan. So essentially, now we look at the characteristics of GMI versus the rest of inventors, and we see that in general, as expected, they are more productive in terms of the patents they produce, in terms of the firms for which they work, the number of years for that they are active. I mean, by construction, this is expected, okay? Especially if we compare them with inventors with only one patent. That's why in the last two columns, we compare them with inventors that have at least two patents to have, in terms of quality, comparable inventors. Yet, despite this, the GMIs are in all the dimensions possible, more productive. They rely more on science. They are more cited. They cite more. So in a number of dimensions, they have more. So the first thing we do is that we try to see whether these GMIs with previous experience are more prevalent in the early stages of the life cycle of a technology in a given country. So for a given country, we sort like over time all the patents in a given technology. We divide these patents in deciles, and we try to understand whether the GMIs are more likely to be in the first decile or the first, second decile, and so on. Let me show you the data set. For this again, this is again Ismael Mena. Ismael Mena, as I said, was the first in patenting in the technology A61B in Chile. We, after him, sort all the patents that came after his patent in that same technology in Chile. Oops. And we divide all our patents like in deciles, okay? And so this first patent of Ismail Mena was in the first decile. These two other, I don't know if you can see my mouse, but the second and third were in the second decile, and so on and so forth, up to the 10 deciles. And then we do a regression in where the dependent variable will be a dummy telling me whether an inventor is a GMI with the previous experience, and the explanatory variables will be dummies for each of the 10 deciles in where the patent is located. And we come up with this graph, which are simply where we plot the coefficients of these regressions. Essentially, what we find is that the GMIs are more likely to be in the first deciles of a technology life cycle in a given country. You find them more often than the average inventor.
Sorry, so it means that like global mobile inventors tend to be like the earliest in patenting in a
so global mobile inventors are overrepresented in the early stages of the technological life cycle in a given country. And we see that this overrepresentation actually fades away quite quickly, meaning that they transmit knowledge to locals, because they are not those that patent later on are not anymore GMIs or not disproportionately GMIs, and therefore this knowledge has been transmitted to the local economy. You may say this definition of the GMI is the one in which they keep the category of GMI for 1 year, for 365 days. You may say, listen, maybe these guys after 1 year kept patenting themselves in that technology, and therefore it's not that they transmitted the knowledge to the local economy, but they simply kept producing the same patents for the country where they arrived. So we redo the same thing with the label GMI always, meaning that we exactly do the same thing, but we can identify if the GMI was ever a GMI. Still, even though the slope is lower, we still see that the knowledge that they brought in to the economy moves into the local inventors, and therefore the GMIs are less and less represented in the technological life cycle. They are overrepresented in the first decile, a bit in the second decile, but after the third, fourth decile, they are not more present than other inventors. So essentially, what we find is that they are overrepresented in the early stage of a technology. But of course, this is a bit strange because we put our focal variable is being a GMI, and we put it as the left-hand side variable. So what we try to do is to come up with a different way to test the prevalence. And essentially, what we look at is that we now reverse the variables. Okay, the dependent and independent variable. Now, the dependent variable would be a dummy indicating whether a pattern is in the early stages of the technology life cycle, in particular whether the pattern is in the first decile. And our explanatory variable will be now whether the guy is a GMI with previous experience in that same technology. This will allow us to add a long list of controls and fix effects. So we can for that we can show some regressions. We see that being a GMI with previous experience is positively correlated with the probability of that pattern to be in the first decile of the technology life cycle. In the second column, it's interesting because we also put a dummy indicating whether the guy is a GMI, but with no experience in that technology. You may be worried because, as I showed you at the beginning, that table, GMIs are essentially superstars. They are more productive, right? So you may say, listen, they are in the early stages of a technological life cycle simply because they are smarter and and they keep producing more ideas. This is in part true, but not all of it, because when you put the GMIs with previous experience and GMIs without previous experience, you see that the coefficient is way stronger for GMIs with previous experience. So they do bring the knowledge from abroad. Aside from creating their own knowledge, they do bring knowledge from abroad, and this is what we wanted to show. We do not see differences if the move occur within the firm or across different firms, a SIGNI being the firm. And we see some differences depending on whether it was an immigrant move or a returnee move. Again, despite all the caveats, because we capture some of these moves, like between China and the United States, India and the United States, but not always, like Canada, United States. But despite this, we see that the coefficient is stronger for the case of returnees than for the case of immigrants. We come with the, with the idea of that, differently maybe from the historical accounts, high skill migration and knowledge diffusion is possibly more important now for countries that are trying to catch up with the leader, which in this case is the United States.
Sorry, can I ask something before you move on? Yeah. So looking at the coefficients here on the GMI immigrant and GMI returnee, should I conclude that the impact of returnee is higher, given the size of the coefficient?
This is our conclusion, yeah.
So this goes back to basically, inventors actually take knowledge from, supposedly the US, which is, rather than the other way around, rather than bring in knowledge.
So they do bring some knowledge. I mean, if this is more than the US as a receiving country, but it's part of the US is a great part of it. So, and still the coefficient is positive and significant, but the returnee case is way bigger. Actually, this comes back to the all the historical investigations on, for instance, the Jews expelled from Germany, or the Huguenots expelled from 17th century France. In all these cases, the skilled migrants were moving from the country which was supposed to be the one in the frontier of knowledge. The chemists and physicists in Germany in the 30s were the top in their fields, and they were moving to the United States, which was like in that field was the follower, right? So with their move, they move the knowledge from the leader to the follower. While nowadays the majority of migration flows, at least for STEM workers or the big part of them, are actually from technology following countries to the leader country. For instance, from China, from India to the leader country, to the United States. Therefore, it is less clear what could be the advantage in terms of knowledge diffusion, not in other things, in terms of knowledge diffusion for the United States. Actually, many of these scientists and engineers will be already trained in the United States. So the majority of their knowledge is acquired already in the United States. So indeed, and therefore that's why we find a stronger effect for returnees.
Ernest, just to warn you that you have about 10 minutes.
Okay. So we do some a lot of robustness checks. We add lots of fixed effects, including individual inventor fixed effects, which is a bit computationally cumbersome, but the coefficient remain there. And we do a lot of checks to make sure that, for instance, the knowledge was not there already in the country. And this comes back to what Jackie was asking before about whether we were using all inventors worldwide or only those that are at the USPTO. So we use also PatchStat to make sure that we do not disambiguate all PatchStat inventors, so all inventors worldwide, but at least we kind of control for the knowledge that was already there in other offices, in the national office. Yeah, so this is what our results.
Just one question. Would it make sense also to like check the robustness with using PCT patents that like you can like control for nationality, even if you will estimate like the lower bound?
Yeah, we could do that. I mean, the difficulty. I mean, so far we didn't do any disambiguation of PCT. There are some disambiguation of inventors of PCT, but they are not super great. And at the end of the day, we have nationality for a limited number of years. So it's not that we, you know, well, the interesting thing of this data set is that we have a long period of time, and therefore we really can see the technology, the tertiary development of a technology that may have spanned several years and decades. But yeah, our aim is now is to try with EPO, but we could do also the same with PCT and also play around with the nationality. But at the end of the day, first of all, nationality has the caveats as well, because inventors can acquire the nationality, and actually you see some of them that do that. And second of all, that what is important for us is not, so we do these differences with returnee and immigrants, but what the main result for us is whether they are the movers, irrespective of the direction of the move. What we are interested is to show that when people move, they are likely to introduce technologies that may be that otherwise may have not country, or maybe would have arrived with a significant delay. Note that when this is something I didn't say, but we disregard all the technological life cycles in a given country that have less than one patent. So it's not that if the guy arrives somewhere and after his arrival we see only 2 or 3 patents, we don't count that. We look at those that have at least 10 patents in the life cycle, meaning that the significant number of patents are produced in the host country. And this is what we want to show. Okay, I'll go fast through this, but we try to understand how this diffusion to the local economy occurs. So as a third step, what we are trying to do now is to split the technological life cycle not in deciles but in percentiles, to have more observations and see in each percentile how prevalent are GMIs, and sort of we try to estimate a sort of the speed of diffusion. We ran 11,000 regressions, for each pair of technology country, to see, you know, we want to understand this slope. We want to see whether the diffusion for each technology country is fast or slow. Okay, with the aim to understand this idea. We want to see whether diffusion is faster when the GMIs are more connected. Okay, and so far we have worked with degree centrality, which is simply the number of connections a GMI have with local inventors that are not GMIs. Okay, so we regress the speed of diffusion of a given technology in a given country on the average degree centrality of the GMIs there. We aim to see that when a GMI is highly connected to local inventors, diffusion will occur faster, and therefore the negative slope will be stronger. And actually, this is kind of what we find so far with this positive coefficient, because we reverse the diffusion measure. So now the biggest diffusion is the fastest, and the fastest diffusion is associated with the average GMIs being highly connected. Of course, degree centrality is a limited number of, is only one measure of influence, which is the number of direct connections the GMI has with the local economy, but we can come up with other measures following the social network analysis literature, like whether they are more or less influential in the whole network where they arrive, and so on and so forth. And this is something we are currently working. So essentially, we do find that global mobile inventors are, as I said, they are superstar. They are more likely to introduce or to be seen in the early stages of a technology life cycle in a given country, particularly, as I said at the beginning, the returnees. We kind of find some evidence that one of the mechanisms through which they are influential is that because they collaborate with other local inventors, although this is something that we are still investigating with other measures of centrality of these GMIs. Aside from what I said at the beginning, that we are trying to do the same with other pattern data sets and try to see whether we find the same results. So thank you for your attention. I hope that especially the last part was kind of clear because I went through it a bit fast.